All right, we are on to the get records element. We've done create records, we've done update records, and now we're going to do get records. And if you've watched any of these back to back or any of the other videos, create, update, and get, they're all pretty similar in the way that I've set them up because it's a good use case. So we're going to go through that one today. If you're new to these videos, basically what we're trying to do as far as like foundation is concerned, we're just trying to set it up in like a very basic way so that you can understand exactly what that element is doing, get an idea more or less of like what you would use that element for. In my own experience, when I was first learning flows and trying to look through a lot of this kind of stuff, I would get to a point where you'd type something in and Google it or put it on YouTube, and you'd find something that maybe had like a get record element in it or some other type of element you were trying to learn. And it just was like too complex. Like the business use case was just kind of out there. It was just too much going on for me to really get a good handle on like the very basic side of this one element so that I could build on that foundation, build on like, okay, this is how this is used, and start using it in more complex processes. So this is more of like a fundamental take on it. I'm aware that there's probably, 500 different ways that I could do this and go about updating it in another way, getting the information in another way. But like I said, this is more just so we have like an easy to understand idea behind it and to get an idea of like what that element is going to work like in a flow. So before we jump into this whole thing, as a quick reminder, if you haven't watched any of my other videos, all of my information will be posted on my blog site. This is my blog site over here. We have Salesforce tips, we have business applications, and we have podcasts. I have a podcast specifically about any of the FAQ in Salesforce. So compensation to roles available to certifications, how you can get your foot in the door. And then I also just started trying to blog more of like my thoughts around things that are helping me progress my career. If that's interesting to you, you can always check those things out too. So I will comment this. This should be in the comments already for you. You can click on it. And the best part about it, the biggest takeaway of why I'm directing you here, is for every one of these videos, I'll have a specific blog post. This blog post will contain all the screenshots of what we're about to talk about, the use case attached with the video. So if you're that type of person that doesn't want to jump through this video and find out what specific part you liked and wanted to review, feel free to jump over here and just read it. Or if you're more the person that just wants to read the information and read up on other things that maybe you know more about and you don't need to watch a video on, you just want to see like an example, you can jump over there too and check out the rest of the blogs that I've posted, the blog posts that I've posted. So if that's you, jump over. I'm going to hurry and jump into the video now. All right. So you clicked on this video. You wanted to learn how to get records in a flow. Like what is that? How it works, what you should be doing with it. It's fairly straightforward, I feel like, in preparation to this video and as many times that I've used it in the past. Essentially what you're trying to do, if we just break it down, like what is it that we're trying to do? Well, we're trying to gather information on some type of object. We want to get information, aka get records, right? And gather the information that's available to use somehow in the flow. Now, whether that is to populate something like we're going to be doing here, or it's to just understand better what the information was on a specific object and how you're going to utilize that information throughout the flow, that might be another use case. In our case here, our business requirement, we need to allow the users to update their favorite music genre, and we need to auto-populate on a screen that we'll have pop up. So this is going to be a Screenflow. With their current selection, just in case that's still what they want their favorite music genre to be. And then we want to update that obviously on the opportunity. So if they click on a button that invokes the flow called update music, if they click that, then invoke the flow. Once the flow is invoked, we need to allow them to put in their favorite music genre, like I mentioned, through some type of screen. And then obviously we have to update that with the information that they put in. So we'll have a get records element, we're going to have a screen, and then we're going to have a update, obviously, to push the update to the opportunity. So we have a Screenflow. If you're not super familiar with a Screenflow is a flow that you can use, and it's for the obvious purpose of populating some type of screen, so the user can input information. If you don't want the user to input information, you could use something else like an auto launch flow. A Screenflow is specifically for the purpose of there's information you need to gather from the user when this flow runs. So in our case, right, I can't populate the music genre unless I know what they want to put in there. So I need them to put in that information. And then once that's done, I can then update it throughout the rest of the flow. So that's what we'll be using. We have the record ID that we're going to be pushing into the flow. I've explained this in the past couple of videos, but I'll go over this again with us just so that we know how that record ID is actually being pushed into the flow. That's kind of a tricky thing when I first started getting into flows. And then also it's a variable. And if you're new to variables, and flows in general, a variable, just think of it like you're shipping something inside of a box. So I always like to compare it to like a storage box inside of your house. So when you have a storage box of like old clothes, let's say, what do? Well, you get out a Sharpie, right? And you label the box, which is what we're doing here. We'll label the variable. You label the box, old clothes. You put that in like a storage unit somewhere, and you put your old clothes inside that box. And then whenever that time comes that you want to take the old clothes out, you go to the storage container, you pull out this box that's labeled old clothes, and then what's inside of it? Obviously old clothes. That's what you put inside of it. And you can take those out and use them, right? Same thing with this variable. We're doing that same exact thing. Basically, a variable is just something that works in that same manner. It's a box, if you want to think of it that way. And you label that box literally anything that makes sense to you. So anything that makes sense, you would put something inside of it. So in our case, right, we have this record ID. And what we want to do is on our opportunity here, we want to be able to grab this number, the record ID that's highlighted, and we want to put it inside of that box. We want to put it inside of that box titled record ID because that's what's inside of it. Once that is inside, it's in our flow and we can utilize that record ID. I'll show you how this can get pushed in. In auto launch flows, you literally like on your process builder, write it out and push in what you want to go inside that box. With Screenflows, it's a little bit different and kind of confusing. I know it was for me when I first started doing them because I didn't really make the connection right off the bat of like how this record ID is found. So I'll answer that question right as we start here. So that's kind of what we have going on. It's kind of the setup, the foundation here for this Get Records use case. So let's go ahead and take a look at our opportunity first. So we have our opportunity and the things we're going to be looking at today. We have a field here titled favorite music genre. And then we also have a button up here that I've hooked up that's in our documentation on that blog site if you want to check out how to do the button part. And you click this. When you click it, right, it's basically asking me to fill out the information that I want to fill out. So if I say it's rock, all right, cool. It updated this and it put in rock. Now, next time I click it, now look what it does. It populates rock for me. And that's going to be part of our use case, right? Just in case I don't ever want to change this, like the business use case had said, we want to populate it with what's already on the opportunity. And that's where that get record element is involved, right? Because it gets the records, it gets the information on this opportunity record. And then it's inputting what that value was into our flow right here, just in case I don't want to change it. So it sets it as that default value for us, which is very nice. So we'll break that down. And that's more or less how this is going to work. Obviously, you just saw it work. And once again, like this is same idea, right? Like you could be thinking like, why doesn't he just fill it out right here? Like he could just update the field, right? And I get that. Once again, this is more just like the idea behind trying to set up a simple idea of how you could use something like this in a flow and a more complex process. It's just to give you that foundation of how it works. Okay, great. So you know how it works. We have our flow. We obviously know it's running right. We have the foundation. We have the use case. So now let's actually jump into our flow and break this thing down so that you can understand what's going on. So let's answer that question first. Your record ID. How does that record ID get in here? Well, on a Screenflow, what's happening? Like, think of it that way first. What's happening here? Well, in order to invoke this flow, I'm clicking a button. So when I click this button, what is being edited? This specific record is being edited in some way, right? Like I made a change or I clicked something on this record. So when I click it and invoke that flow, this record ID is like already a part of the flow in a way, because it senses that trigger and says like, oh, this record ID had some type of change, so we need to ship this in. And this is where this part can get tricky. Specifically for the record ID, it doesn't apply to my knowledge on any other label. But like I had mentioned earlier, when you want to go and create like a new variable, a new box to store something in, as I had mentioned, you should usually be able to just title it. Like I could title something literally that and store something inside of it. If I knew what was in here and that made sense to me, I could store that. I could say, hey, take, close date on the opportunity and put it in this box titled this. I could take the stage name and put it in this box, right? I could do whatever I want. I could label it whenever I want. So that example, if you think about it with like the old close type of thing, it's the same idea, right? Like if you didn't want to name it old clothes, you could put like, Goodwill on there or something like that, or old jeans or old shirts or old hats, whatever made sense to you, you could label it that and you would know in your head, like, okay, I have some like old clothes in there, right? It's the same idea with this. You could name it literally whatever you want, except for the record ID. And that's why it's like confusing. And when I first started doing this, and even not too long ago, actually, I was working on a flow. I'd done like a lot of auto launch ones like right in a row. And I forgot that this needed to be labeled what it was. I was I wasn't able to get like my flow to connect. And sure enough, I had spelt this wrong. So specifically on this one, you have to name it. Whoops. You have to name it this. It has to be spelt just like you see it there. If I were to name it record ID, which is what I did on accident the other day, it didn't work. It doesn't input that in there. It doesn't know what that is. So specifically on screen flows, you have to name it like that in order for that record ID to be stored in there. Kind of weird and dumb and like this nuance thing. I'm sure there's like a great reason for it that somebody could probably tell me and be like, oh, well, this is how flows work and blah, 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 blah. And here's your complex idea of why that has to happen. I personally don't know, but I don't know why it needs to be named that, but it does. So just make sure when you do a screen flow, you name it like this, okay? So now we got that out of the way, answered a question on how it gets input into the flow. We know that it's in the flow. It's stored in here. I've named it correctly. Great. So let's hook it up. We got our get records, our number one element to make this work, where we should spend most of our time here so that you understand what's going on. All right, so when I go to edit this, right, same idea with these labels. You can name this whatever you want. There's no specific thing you have to name a lot of this kind of stuff in your flow. You can name it whatever makes sense to you. It doesn't have to be something crazy. Doesn't have to be like a weird name. I always try to make it super simple of like what's going on. In this specific element, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to find opportunity information. So I'm going to label it find opportunity information. And then that way, when I'm out here, I know what this does. Well, this finds opportunity info, right? So that's the easiest way that I like to do it. If you're trying to apply this to your org and it's like a new org, highly, highly, highly recommend coming up with a naming convention, because there's nothing worse than when somebody just goes in and they have their own idea of how they like stuff named. Somebody else gets in and does the same thing, and then pretty soon X amount of time goes by and you get into somebody else's, it's not yours, and you're like, what the heck is all this? Why is it named this? So as like a company, if this isn't like your own personal thing you're doing, and you're not the only admin, I would highly recommend coming up with like a naming convention of like what works for you guys so that everybody's on the same page of how they name their stuff. But the idea behind it is it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter like what you name it. It just has to make sense for you guys. Great. So we named it Find Opportunity Info. Same idea with the description. I would always put in a description so that people using this can get in here and get a good idea of what's going on. If they don't understand, like if you have a unique naming convention you got to stick to, please put in the description so that they understand like what that element is doing. So in ours, right, element will find opportunity information. Pretty straightforward. Next part, it's going to ask us like, all right, we have, all these objects that are available in Salesforce. Which one do you want to find information on? So it always starts in the kind of like this hierarchy. It looks at the object, and then it's going to look at the record on that object, and then what fields on that record you want to update. So first starting, we got to know the object. Second, we got to know what record on that object we're editing. Third, we got to know what fields we're editing on that record, right? So that's how this works. So first, we're going to select opportunity. That's the object we're using. Now it's deciding with this condition thing. It's asking like, how do I know what record I should edit as like a system, right? And that's easy because all we're going to do is say, grab that good old opportunity ID, because that is this right here, the opportunity ID, right? We want to match that up with the record ID, which is also this, right? So if those two match, literally, because this is a unique number, that's a great way to match it up, right? Very simple, very basic. If it matches one another, that's how you know. So, and maybe another way that makes sense to think of that is saying, we have this value, this record ID, which is right here, on our opportunity. Sorry. We have this little highlighted guy that's our record ID, and we stored it inside a box called record ID. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to edit that record. So go and find this value in the opportunity ID section. So it's kind of like looking through like a catalog of sorts, right? It's like we have this value, go match it up with the value in the opportunity ID. And if those two match, great. That's the one that we want to update. So that's what we're doing. So we find our record, it's updating it. Or sorry, it's going to go find the records on that opportunity. Apologize if I've been saying edit. It's going to go find it. That's what this is doing. It's going to go find the information on that record. And now there's other things you can do. This, I honestly have never touched it. I'm sure there's some reasons for it. Basically, it's just like asking you how it wants to sort the records. I always just say not sorted. I only want to grab the first record because it should only match one record anyway, since we're just matching by the record ID. And then we're going to assign those to a variable. So choose fields and assign variables. That's what we want to do. We're going to store them together in something called a record variable. At some point, I'll get to a video on specifically that so you can understand that better. But basically, it's just an easier way to store all of your information. Instead of creating 50 different variables and naming it like opportunity music, opportunity ID, opportunity stage name, and that's 3 right there. I would want to just grab one record variable and say on this record variable, grab all the information like field wise, all those fields that are available on the opportunity. And then I'll store stuff in each one of those fields as I need to. So right now that's what it's doing. It's looking at the opportunity. There's all those fields that are available that I can now input stuff into. So if I want to go like, hey, grab stage name, go and look for that. Or I could say, well, the one we want to do, go find the favorite music genre, go and find that and store it in the favorite music genre. So that's what that's doing. It's literally going and finding that, and it's storing it inside of this variable. And if we ever needed to look at that, which I'll show you in just a minute here, you can drill into that record ID. So let's back that up. I kind of spit a bunch of stuff out that maybe doesn't matter to you. The basic part of this is what? we're looking at 3 levels. We're looking at the opportunity object, what record on the opportunity, and then what fields we want to get or store or find on that object, on that record. And that's what we did. We set opportunity, we matched it up, and lastly, we're saying, okay, go and find the favorite music genre. That's the main point of this whole thing. We're going to go find that. So we got it, we stored it, we put it inside a box titled opportunity dot favorite music genre. That's where we stored this. So that's it. That's kind of like your biggest part of this. You know what? I wasn't going to, but I'll show you just in case you want to do this in separate variables, okay? Because I don't think I learned doing it this way first. I wish I would have, but I didn't. I learned doing it this way. If you do it in separate variables, this is what it would look like if you do all those individually, right? So if we want to go and find, it's now asking me, what do you want to go and find on this opportunity record? Well, I want to go find the favorite music genre because we need that. And I could go in here and I can store it. That's what this record variable allows you to do. I can go, yep, I want to go into the opportunity record variable that I created. Boom. And then I want to go store it inside of this thing called favorite music genre, which is what we did, right? We already did that. So that's how that works. But if you didn't want to do that, it's still fine. You could do it another way. You could create a variable. You could title this opportunity fave music. And then you could input this, right? Data type is text, inputs available, boom. And now look, I'm storing it inside a box titled opportunity fave music. So you could do it that way. It just gets nuance if I had to do more of these to like keep creating those versus just having some of that work cut out for me and just storing it inside my record variable, which that's what I would prefer to do here. So that's what I'm going to do. Boom. All right, cool. So now we're just going to hook it up to these other two that we're not going to spend as much time on since that's not what this video is about. But I'll show you how this stuff works. So next we have our screen, right? We have our display text. We have a text box. In this text box, we're going to populate this information. Whole reason that we wanted to get this information was so that we could populate this as a default value, right? So technically I could leave it blank. I don't need to default something in there. But in that use case that the user doesn't want to change the music genre, well, it's going to be kind of annoying that they don't have that information available to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to put inside of this default value, we're going to go and get that information where we stored it. Well, I stored it where? I stored it on the opportunity record variable. And then I put it inside of a subcategory titled favorite music genre. So literally that's how you write it. And I'll show you that one more time because I could write it if I wanted to, right? I could put opportunity, and as soon as I hit that dot, it allows me to kind of go into like a subfolder or a subcategory, if you want to think of it that way. Like it's like, okay, we have this record, which is the opportunity, great. Boom, inside of it now, there's all these fields inside of it. What one do you want to grab? Which one are we pulling, right? Well, we're pulling the favorite music one. Cool. So now that's there. So that's going to auto-populate it for us. And then obviously the very last one, we're just going in here that works very similar to the get records. We're matching it up, all that. And we're saying, hey, go to the field favorite music genre and update it with favorite music genre. This one is a little bit different, right? Because we're saying go here, and where I'm grabbing the value, where I care, is not inside of the record variable. Because if I updated this one with this value, whatever they put in on the screen portion wouldn't matter. It would just say, cool, you wanted to change that to, hip hop instead of rock? No, doesn't matter. I'm going to use this, whatever value was originally input, and I'm going to use that to update it. So if I update to hip hop, it's just going to revert back to rock instead, which doesn't make sense, right? Why would we have them input information if we're not going to use it? So instead, you go into your header here that's screen components, and you're going to grab favorite music genre. That's that text box where they're filling out that information. And that's where we would do that, right? So now, as you can see, that's all hooked up. I don't need to save it. I jump back over here. I click my button, and it's like hip hop, right? Boom. And it updates. Great. Now if I click it again, hip hop pops up and I can switch it to rock. Rock goes away. I can click it again and I can update it to country, right? And the same idea is true as if they want to keep country and they see that it's country. They're like, oh, wait, that's actually what I still want to keep it as. They can exit out. They don't have to update it, right? So that's more or less how those get records would work and a good scenario of when you would use it in a default value.